Why your medical records or the lack of medical records is key to winning your ERISA disability insurance claim after you've been terminated. Let's talk about this interesting topics, because once you've been terminated by your employer, your ERISA disability coverage is basically over. And that can be problematic if you're after the fact claiming that you were disabled at the time you were terminated and you were working while disabled. Now, there are lots of problems with these types of cases, and the easy way to solve this is to get your doctor to take you out of work before you get terminated. You've got to prove your entitlement to benefits as of the date that you were terminated, and not that you were disabled after you were terminated. So you've got to go back and look at that definition of disability. That generally will require medical proof that can be really hard to provide after the fact. If you were working and you weren't seeing a doctor, that's going to be tough to argue that you were in fact disabled at the time you were terminated. Now, the lack of medical records can kill this case, but let's say that you have in fact been treating with a physician prior to termination. They're going to get your medical records. And if there's nothing in those medical records documenting the treatment that you were getting before termination, the nature of your symptoms, or the impact that the symptoms had on your functionality, that's going to be a problem. You are required to get reasonable and appropriate medical care, regardless of whether you are disabled or necessarily meet the definition of disabled. What do I mean by that? Disability carriers require that you get reasonable medical necessary treatment, because if you weren't, then certainly there's an argument that you in fact weren't disabled. They're also going to be looking at the hours that you were working at the time you were terminated. If you'd reduced your hours to 30 or below, they're going to argue that you don't have coverage. Now, if you're in that zone where you are working while disabled, again, the disability carrier is going to look at your wages to see whether or not you've lost sufficient wages to meet the wage loss requirement. So it's not enough that you were disabled, that you were working while disabled. You have to have a reduction in your wages. And in looking at all of this, they're going to be looking at those medical records. They're going to be trying to figure out, when did you start having symptoms? How did those symptoms impact your ability to function? How often were you getting visits? What was the length of time between visits? What was the doctor saying about your ability to work? The more information that addresses all these issues, and which is favorable to you, the more likely it is you can overcome a claims denial. But if you don't have that and you're making this after the fact argument, it's going to be pretty tough. I know that it can be hard to deal with the fact that you are not capable of working, or working the way that you've always worked. And you're tempted to hide your symptoms, and you're tempted to hide the impact it has on your functionality. That's particularly true if you've been working remotely and you can take breaks as needed and resume work when your symptoms permit. But the reality is, if you get the sense that your position is going to be eliminated, you're going to be terminated, and you're having problems, you need to be consulting as quickly as possible with an experienced ERISA disability attorney. I will be reviewing your medical records, listening to your story about what's going on with your symptoms and what's going on with your employer, because we want to create a winning path to get your disability benefits. It might be that you need to see your doctor as soon as we get off the phone and give them a history of your symptoms and functionality, and have them take you out of work before your hours are reduced, before you're laid off, before you're terminated. Fixing things after the fact can be darn difficult. So don't put yourself in this situation. Call me today at 727-894-3188 for a complimentary consultation. Don't be a John Wayne. Call 727-894-3188.